Welcome to Kia e-Niro Diaries on the 27th of September. Welcome especially to new subscribers, of which there have been quite a few since the last video. Anyway, I'm out for a walk with the dog, there he is, in the beautiful countryside around where we live in the Desperation. Late September, still beautifully warm, t-shirt and jeans. T-shirt and shorts, I mean, gosh, no, jeans, never wear those. Anyway, those of you who've watched the channel before know that this is mostly about the long-term ownership experience of the e-Niro, and it actually goes in for service in Niort this afternoon. So I'm driving to Niort this afternoon, put it in for the 90,000 kilometre service, and I'll have more on that in another video. But I also, if you've not watched this channel before, you know that I like to talk about the industry as well. For a lot of my working life, I was an industry analyst in the telecom business, I should add. But you know, I'm trying to understand new technologies, how they're going to develop, and all the factors that are involved in these disruptive technologies. Was I very good at predicting how things would go? No, not particularly. I got a few things right, got a lot wrong. But anyway, I like to share my thoughts on what's going on in the industry of cars. I grew up about 500 yards from the factory gates of what is now the Mini plant in Swindon. My dad worked there for about 30 years. Used to press all the panels for Austin Rover and all of those cars. So I've kind of had an interest in the industry for a long time. And one of the channels I really like is a channel called Petrol Ped. He, like me, used to work in the telecom business. He's a bit younger than me and he's a very professional presenter. He's a real car enthusiast. He's not particularly pro or anti-EV, but he does a very fair sort of assessment of the way things are going, and he kind of frames the debates that we need to be having around how we get to cleaner air, really, which is what we all want. So, recent decision by the EU. Hang on, dog has seen something strange. Just a sec. Okay, nothing to worry about there. So the UK government then last week made the decision to roll back its plans to ban the sale of petrol and diesel cars in 2030. And the question is, do we think that will make much difference to the take-up of electric vehicles? Well, I don't think it will, to be honest. So why is that then? Well, basically you just need to follow the money. And although Petrol Ped in his latest dog walking video, which is why I'm kind of copying him really, because it works very well. He does it a lot better than me, but you know, he's got the resources to do that, and it's actually his full-time job, which is amazing. I'm just a retired old guy, yeah, you shouldn't really. I clicked all the wrong buttons when I set up the YouTube channel, but so I don't get that much on the algorithm, I suppose you could say. So anyway, what Petrol Ped is saying is that you know, there's a place for e-fuels, there's a place for plug-in hybrids, and there's a discussion to be had around hydrogen, and that's fair enough. But actually, as an industry analyst, it's you follow where the investment's going, you see where it's happening, and you know, there's a little bit of investment going. I mean, I think GM was it last year said they were going to do a new version of their V8 engines in America to keep all those giant trucks going, I suppose. I don't know. But it was about $700 million or something. But it's tiny compared to the billions they're putting into battery manufacturers with partners and the investment that's going into designing new EVs. As to be honest, all the traditional car manufacturers are beginning to realize that making an EV is not just a question of doing what you've always done and replacing an engine, gearbox and exhaust with battery and a motor, it's a lot more complicated than that. There's different disciplines involved. The factory needs to be designed differently. You know, and Tesla have shown this. Their first purpose-built factory in Shanghai is far more productive than the one that they gutted from an old car factory in Fremont. Which is actually, I know that place very well, because in the 1990s I used to work for a firm in the telecoms industry that I used to have to go by that factory every day on my way to work when I was out there working in Fremont. So I know the place very well. And so Tesla got this old factory, they gutted it, but as I think Elon Musk said, that designing a car is really hard, but designing the factory to build the car is like 10 times harder. And I think this is where the traditional car companies are really struggling, including VW, by the way, who are making EVs, and they're selling them, but they're not the most desirable EVs out there. So where's the money going? Well, it's all going into electric vehicles. It's going into battery electric vehicles. The sales of plug-in hybrids, although Petrol Ped talks about them as, you know, they've got a great deal going for them. I mean, he points out the latest VW Tiguan, is it, can do 100 kilometers on its battery before you need to even power up the engine. But fact is, it's still carrying around all that excess weight, and it's still got a complex machine that needs to be serviced and have its oil changed. And it makes you think, well, hang on, there's really no downsides now to having an EV. I mean, we went up to Brittany a few weeks ago, if you saw my video there, 1,000-kilometer round trip. There's plenty of places to charge, certainly here in France. And I've just planned the trip. We're going down to Spain in a few weeks' time. Again, I can do the whole trip pretty much charging on Tesla at 40 centimes a kilowatt hour. Anyway, that's again, I digress. So the money then, it's all going into electric vehicles. Last week, the German government pulled the plug on their support for e-fuels at the, I think it was the IEA or some conference in Munich, a car where a lot of new cars were shown. And basically, you know, this idea that you can, you know, suck carbon out of the atmosphere, freeze it and then reformulate it into fuel. Wonderful idea. And Porsche are very much behind this, and I know quite a few videos have been made about this. It's the kind of great white hope of the combustion vehicle lovers, that they can keep their suck, squeeze, bang, blow technology going along the road. But, you know, it's just got no legs. It's got no legs on it. It's not going to happen. And I think people need to disabuse themselves of that hope. For a start, it's extremely expensive to make, as Petrol Ped points out. We're talking, even at scale, we're going to see $6 to $8 US dollars a litre for this stuff. And then, of course, where do you get the energy to actually produce the fuel? It's got to come from renewables if it's going to be truly green. So e-fuels, not really. It's not going to happen. It's not going to get the investment. Plug-in hybrids, the sales are tailing off. When you look at electric vehicle sales month on month, the proportion taken up by plug-in hybrids as opposed to pure battery electric, it's getting smaller and smaller as a percentage, as people realise, hey, you know, most EVs now, they'll do 250 to 300 miles. Battery technology isn't standing still. You know, we've already got cars coming next year that are going to be able to do 600, 700, 800 kilometres, and we know that there's battery technology being tested at the moment that's got 3-4 times the energy density of what's in the e-Niro. So, you know, within a few years we're going to be looking at cars that can just do basically whatever anyone could ever possibly want, any use case you can imagine. And the other thing, the charging speeds are getting faster all the time. Mine is now really old technology. When we stop, we always stop for about 30 or 40 minutes. But then again, we combine that with lunch or using the bathroom. Yeah. Logan, tutoie. Yeah, tutoie. Yeah, he sometimes wants to go down that other path. This is a bilingual dog. This, he speaks French and English pretty well. So anyway, yeah, if you just look at the sales, EVs are not going away. I mean, we've gone globally from about 2%, 1.5–2% of global sales being EVs in 2019 to 10% last year. We're going to be up to about 14–15% this year. In China now, EVs are in the high 30%, selling about 750,000 a month. And we've got in Europe it's about 21% now of all car sales are EVs, and even in the United States, which is a bit behind, sales have doubled this year. So it's only going one way. And of course, while EVs are going up, fossil fuel car sales are coming down, and as you see from the chart here, it's been steadily going down, and the people who make fossil fuel cars are going to start to suffer from a diseconomy of scale fairly shortly, if they're not already. I read a report in The Economist a few years ago on the car industry, and they were saying that there's about $2 trillion worth of capital tied up globally in factories making fossil fuel cars, and they reckon there's about 1,000 factories around the world that build internal combustion engines. And of course, the industry for decades has suffered from overcapacity. It's had a theoretical capacity of between 90 and 100 million light-duty vehicles, cars and vans every year. But in fact, I think sales peaked. Yes, sales peaked in 2017 globally. I think it was about 74–75 million, which is why it's extremely hard for them to make money. I mean, even the big companies like VW, their margins on things like the VW Golf are tiny. So I really don't see any other way for the future. I mean, it's either electric cars or something else that's going to solve the problem of pumping CO2, particulates, sulfur dioxide and nitric oxides and other nasties into the atmosphere. That's got to stop. So the UK government's recent decision, political desperation. I mean, they won Boris Johnson's old seat at Slough and Uxbridge a few months ago by a tiny margin. It was like 100, 200 votes. And they say that the reason they lost it was because of the ultra-low emission zone rules that Sadiq Khan is expanding out, which would include that constituency. And it makes you wonder, clearly it's a blatant grab for votes at next year's election by Rishi Sunak. So, whatever your politics, it's a bit transparent. And you then ask the question, well, are there really more people who want the right to drive old diesels around than want to see cleaner air? And I think there's a lot more people. There's a lot more people who want to see cleaner air than there are to drive fossil fuel cars. So anyway, that's just my thoughts on the subject. Not that it makes any difference at all, it's just interesting. I think we're living through an amazing time of revolution in the way we produce energy. So, France is adding an awful lot of renewable energy, as everywhere is. It's so month by month your EV gets cleaner wherever you are. So of course, if you're lucky enough to be able to charge at home, or even better, like we have solar panels, where you basically cover all the costs of the miles or kilometers you do from your roof, then you're very lucky. And that's not something you can do obviously with any kind of fossil fuel car, but Petrol Ped and others point out the fact that what do you do with if you can't get your car off the road, if you can't charge at home, or if you live in an apartment or a terrace house and you have to park on the street, well, it's a fair point, but actually look at where you see the most EVs. When I travel around France, I see a lot more EVs in the cities than I do out here in the country, where everybody seems to run around in old cars and vans. And you know, the UK has 8% of its population living in apartments. France has 44, I think it is. So yeah, I mean, look, there's so many places you can plug in, even if you live in an apartment. And, you know, apartment owners are going to be incentivized, certainly they are here in France, to put charging points in for the residents. But the biggest growth in, you know, AC slow charging is to companies. That's according to the firms who make the home chargers. They say they're selling more to business now than they are to residents, because it's a very, very cheap benefit that an employer can offer an employee to be able to plug in while they're at work. And then of course you've got supermarkets you can plug in. I mean, you only need, you know, to charge once a week typically to get all your miles you need. So really the whole kind of apartment living not suitable for EV owners, it's not the case. There's lots and lots of people who live in apartments and who have EVs. That's well documented, plenty of videos on people who are in that situation. And I say, the facts don't support the idea that EVs are not suitable for apartment dwellers, because, as I say, you see a lot more EVs on the roads in the cities than you do out here in the country. Anyway, where's the dog? Ah, okay. There he is. So the petrol heads, the anti-EV, I will never drive one of those mob, of which there are quite a few still, illogically in my view. Do they like just the roar of the engine, the smell of the unburnt hydrocarbons? I don't know. They're missing out because EVs are smoother, quieter, cheaper to run, far less hassle. You know, I really don't see any downsides in an EV these days, especially the ones being made now with 250 to 300 mile ranges. Anyway, so, but look, you know, Petrol Ped asks the question, you know, is there room for other technologies? Well, of course there are. I mean, goodness, there are 1.5 billion fossil fuel cars on the world's roads, and even if every vehicle sold from today was an electric vehicle, it would take 20 years for those fossil fuel cars to hit the scrapyard. But we're getting very close to the point now where the number of the number of fossil fuel cars being scrapped every year is going to exceed the number of new ones coming out of the factories. Shown before that there's been a steady decline in the sales of petrol and diesel cars globally, and as their numbers decline, their production numbers decline, their costs are going to go up. So we are certainly going to see price parity between EVs and fossil fuel cars within the next 2 years, and by 2030 quite possibly EVs will be cheaper. Now, of course, a lot of people say, oh, all these EVs are really expensive. And that is true in a way, because so many EVs are big vehicles, SUVs, fully loaded with every gadget you could imagine. And there's a reason for that, obviously. That if you're a product manager in one of the car companies, you've got a very, very high input cost in terms of the battery, and you can't really control that input cost. So you're not going to put those in your small, cheap models. You're going to put that scarce resource, those batteries, you're going to put those into your most expensive models. You're going to charge premium price. But that's changing rapidly. There's so many more small cars now hitting the market. They're still more expensive than the petrol versions. But as I said, battery prices are coming down. This month alone, it's been reported that in China, EV battery prices have fallen from $88 US dollars a kilowatt hour to 82. Outside of China, we're seeing prices 120, 130. Now, when the eNiro was made in 2019, they were like $300 to $400 a kilowatt hour. So there's getting competition as more and more battery factories open. I mean, just here in France, in northern France, there's 4 new factories, battery factories being built. One actually opened in May and is beginning to ramp up. And you're starting to see those coming now in the new Peugeot, Citroëns and those cars that are made up there in northern France. I mean, it's about 15 billion euros worth of investment has gone into batteries just in France. And I mean, in America, it's like 10 times that. In Germany, it's 3 times that. And the Chinese aren't going to give up their current domination of the market in batteries. So there's going to be huge competition putting downward pressure on battery prices. Germany now has its first lithium hydroxide plant, so they're beginning to build other bits of the battery supply chain here in Europe, as they are in the United States, to become not so dependent on China. And of course, China itself is a very, very important player in all this, not simply because they build 70% of the world's EVs. A lot of them are obviously coming from Tesla as well. But they are bringing new brands to the market, some very capable cars like the MG4 and the BYD products, which we're starting to see now here in Europe. How much protectionism will there be against those? No, we don't know. So anyway, the whole argument of will the rescinding of the 2030 ban on petrol and diesels have much effect on the take-up of EVs? I don't think so. I don't think it's going to make much difference, simply because by 2030 EVs will be on price parity, if not cheaper. The choice of models will be just as wide as they are for petrol and diesel cars, and as I say, petrol and diesel cars will be, if you're still in the business of making them, you're going to have to, your margins will either be very tiny or you'll be making them at a loss, which of course companies don't like to do that. So anyway, I hope you found that interesting, and look at this absolutely stunning day. Absolutely gorgeous, and he loves it. Okay, until the next time.